You know, my background is in science first, and it was interesting to hear, you know, in terms of biochemistry. I remember what was really fascinating in the biochemistry lectures that the teacher, the lecturer was saying, and there's big holes in this for you to fill, you know, and this I found, you know, really fascinating, and to go into kind of areas that are not generally really known, which is something that's followed me since I stopped studying science, because the biochemistry lab, the organic chemistry lab was so poisonous for my body that I actually had to stop the life there, and I studied science, visual art afterwards. At Goldsmiths College in London, yeah. And after some years there, I had started to make large objects and producing this sort of which become rubbish, stuff that I didn't know where to put, objects, you know, that need storage space and stuff like this, and I didn't want to kind of contribute to this production of rubbish. Sorry, but, well, I'm sorry, everyone, but you know, there is a lot of kind of. So anyway, I started to work with sound quite 92 already, I think. And
what about sound pollution?
Yeah, there's right there at the moment. Yeah, and through, I won't go very deep into my former practice, but I used a lot of sensors, made interactive installations where people could interact with the sound, alter the sound when they move through a space. And at that point I had started to record out in nature, and then people would alter the sound and distort the sound with their movements and such things. But through the use of these sensors, I came across, you know, the contact microphone and then the piezos, and then it has kind of developed to where I know I'm using this type of hydrophone here. I mean, I'll go through different stages from the basic contact microphone to the more and more kind of expensive, sensitive hydrophones, of which I'm using this one now. Actually, I have problems with this because it's too sensitive, so it also pick up radio signals if I'm not deep enough in the ocean. And at the moment, I'm very curious to get this kind of the tiniest insect that makes the loudest sound. You know, we have the largest animal on the planet, which is the blue whale, that makes the loudest sound, but the backsweepers, they are the loudest according to size, and I can pick them up with this hydrophone, for example. So that's one of my instruments. Though, how to get to the interest of reef. I was doing a project where we were following, myself and Chris Watson, we were following the migration of cod from the Barents Sea, you know, the fish cod, down on the coast to spawn. This was in 2006, 2007. And I called up to the Marine Institute in Bergen, thinking about what was said before in terms of putting artists and scientists together from a sort of built structure. You are this. I believe much more in from the bottom, that you actually are working, that the project determines kind of who you kind of collaborate, who you ask the questions. And so I basically called them up and I asked, can I join you on the research trip? And they said immediately, yeah, come along, because I wanted to learn more about cod, for example. And they were doing research on the ecology of the Barents Sea, of which they've done for years, collecting data up there. Anyway, on this ship there was the lady that found the deep sea coral reef on the coast of Norway, and this is where my kind of triggered my interest in corals and the environment, of which is threatened, of course, as also other environments underwater, because we seem to think that out of sight is out of mind. and still do. Even in the most beautiful areas in the north of Norway. I was recording recently, and I was pulling up my hydrophone, and I was doing like this, you know, just like a reflex. I had an immediate sort of infection in my eye, you know, it took weeks to get rid of it. It looks beautiful, it's said to be really clean, but it's just so polluted, you know, in the water right outside there in the visually beautiful landscape. And you see a lot of fish with growths, with deformities, you know, also in the north of Norway. But anyway, so of course then, for me, for example, the acidification that is happening and is in an accelerating rate, I became very interested in Göran Nilsson's work, recently published, where fish are actually losing their sense of smell and hearing, so they become really brave and swim right into the mouth of the predators. This is, you know, something I would like to look more and listen more into. Of course, the noise pollution that is happening. I'm also quite intrigued by the fact that fish larvae might have the sense of homing back into a reef, and that actual different areas will have different sound identities, you know, like environments. And how is the noise pollution? We know that, you know, certain areas where whales are calling out for their mates has been crossed by shipping, what do you call it, waves, shipping noise, so that they can't find each other anymore. And I think that they are doing research on that in Norway, whether the seismic testing are actually affecting the hearing of fish. You know, and through all these kind of questions, I've gone quite far into kind of understanding and seeing how complex hearing and sensing of in fish are. You know, with the lateral line, how they kind of that's working with hydrodynamic waves, and the hearing, the otoliths inside the ears, and when you start to go right into it, it's really interesting how complex and the sensory possibilities of the fish are really. Another thing, of course, we also are very interested in doing is to get high quality sound recordings. And to work on that, and also to present this, of course, then to an audience, but not only to present as a performance, as an installation, as a release, which I do, but also the meetings I do out there in the field, you know, walking along around the shore, you know, being on the boat. Like last year, I was on the boat here with Tomo, and we went out recording. And, you know, just to kind of see people's face when they put on the headphones and are listening, and it's like a new world, you know, it's like, and I believe to add a sense to our understanding of the underwater, we can hopefully sort of spread the word and gain the respect and knowledge, and hopefully curiosity of also young people to go in there and do to go and do research. I mean, I must say, a friend of my daughter, after having heard called haddock, you know, out there, has decided to become a marine biologist. And so, yeah, I'll stop there. I think. Oh, I forgot. Maybe I should just play a sound. Yeah, I will. Yes. I had planned. That's why I have a computer. Some of the earlier recordings I did in 2006 or something. It was after I had identified cod, because I had seen it, and it was they are in mating season. They're very vocal. You will talk more about it. No, this much more than I know. But I saw them, and they made a grunt, and I heard the first wild one. I was like, they're top. You know, wow, there's a wild cod. I heard it, you know. But then later, at night, 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, you have to go out to avoid human noise, you know. And I also realized they're quite vocal in nighttime, in the summer when there's mating time. And I was just amazed how complex, how much was actually going on. Over the surface was totally quiet and dark. And then I can play this file. So I keep coming back to that because there's so much going on under there. Lots of activity, grunting, eating, you know, movements happening. And I just have to play one more here, or maybe even 2, because there is this rumbling sound that cod is doing when they're mating. I'm sorry, this and I'm not really sure because I haven't seen it with a camera, but I just heard it, so I don't really quite know. When they are circling.
Beginning to sound like a cod.
No. I'm sorry. Oh gosh.
Nice sound.
Oh, great. Okay, you had a sort of slow rumble. And I think it could be very cold. Oh shit. Mating, and actually doing the act of mating, and they're spiraling up to the surface. I'm gonna play one. I have to stop playing.
Just to give you a rest before we get into any more conversation, maybe let's hand over to Sarah. Thank you very much, Jana.
I got to stand up, I can't talk sitting down. This is a really strange audience for me to be participating in.
Thank you.
It's been really strange for me as a scientist. I don't normally get out in the real world. And of course, thanks to the Academy and Francesca for inviting me. I'm going to try to explain why I think I might be here and what I'm trying to look for. But first, how many people believe in ESP, extrasensory perception? Do I need? I don't need this. I don't use it.
Recording.
Can you hear? Oh, just put it there. I can't talk into a microphone. All right. We'll pick up.
Yeah, it's fine.
But how? You know what? Extrasensory perception, right? ESP. those things that are outside of what we normally perceive. And part of what you're hearing with these fish sounds are sounds that we cannot hear as humans underwater. And there's a bunch of reasons. There are some fish we can hear, but many we can't. And I'm going to talk a little more about fish sounds, but it's not just sounds. There's ultraviolet light and radiation. Fish, birds, insects see in the UV, and we're just developing the technology to start to see anatomy, auras and things that occur around, you know, animals and the radiation we put out. So as science, we're looking for signals beyond what we can see. And what I want to try to explain in sort of a short story is how I use this to try to do science, and ultimately how this can apply to real societal issues of conservation, fisheries, particularly like where to set up marine preserves. The way people set up marine protected areas today are to go out and pick a pretty spot. And for years I've been saying, well, that's not enough. We have to pick the spots that animals use for their life histories and survival. In the marine system, we're talking about where and when fishes spawn, what happens to eggs and larvae, and get back, recruitment, the heart of fisheries that we've been struggling with as societies for hundreds of years. We've been studying cod, for example, in the North Atlantic. All the nations of the world have fishery vessels, yet we still can't manage these fisheries. So how did it come around? How do we do this? I'm an ichthyologist. I study fish. I've looked at many different aspects of it. I headed up a large program for the military, the U.S. Department of Defense, looking at environmental impacts of weapons and war on the world's environments. And the problem is, how do you quantify impacts? And one of the things that I look at is how fish reproduction is disturbed. Now, if you know about fisheries, the way we traditionally look at fisheries, and you can go out as we walk here to the monastery, see all those fish nets. The way traditionally we've looked at fisheries is to go out and, first of all, kill fish. Cut them open, look at their gonads. It's usually labor-intensive, destructive. We could drag nets through the water to collect eggs and larvae and try to look at plankton. But you know, that came from an early day when we didn't understand the complexity of ocean currents and flow patterns. If you look at it, this bay, it is not a homogeneous mass of water. There's complexity of current. So if you are taking a net in the water, it's a sampling problem, and throw a frisbee out there, let's say in the backyard, you're looking for earthworms, you throw a frisbee, if you drag a net randomly through the water, you don't know, like the frisbee, does it land on a rock, a dirt? How do you know where you're sampling? And lastly, we could try to dive. And diving, scuba, you know, it's relatively new technology, came around when I was a kid. But you've got to be in the water, you're limited, you know, 20 meters for 60 minutes. You can only be in the water so long. And I've struggled with this for a long time. I was running a large project in the Pacific. I had big boats, airplanes, all sorts of technology to determine where and when fishes were spawning relative to ocean currents. As Tony kind of mentioned, one of the huge breakthroughs was when these little handy cams came out, and they did two things that a scientist could use. The first was they were small, portable, and self-contained, but they had audio input. So you can take little Johnny and Janie's birthdays and film them. And then secondly, they developed low light capability. You know, my predecessors, like Jacques Cousteau, if you watch these films, were diving with big cameras, bright lights, and most of these early films show fish and animals swimming away from them. And I can tell you, unless you're into porno films and stuff, most animals that like to breed like to have quiet and peace, and it's a real struggle to sort of sneak up and capture. So most of, I'm going to show you some fish porn in a minute. You'll see how that comes around. And so I started, you know, thinking about this question in the early 80s, and I was actually working on I'm a scientist. I work in a lot of different fields. One of the projects I worked on was during the Cold War, submarine warfare and how we hide subs behind ocean currents and thermal. And if you've ever seen the movie Hunt for Red October, you know we were dropping hydrophones in the water, and you can hear things move through the water. And I was on one of these projects, I thought, wow, maybe I could listen to fish, but I didn't, and I'd already been diving by this time for 25 years and in the water. We knew that some fish made sound, but not that many did. And there were numbers of fish that we had studied, I had published, and other people had published papers about. And we could see their behavior, and they rushed through the water, and I thought, well, maybe I could use the same military technology, sort of a crossover, to do science and to listen where and when these fish spawn. And what I wanted to develop was a spawnometer, a capability of listening to the sounds to quantify where and when fish were reproducing as an alternative to killing them, plankton nets, or diving, and more importantly, to get the kind of data we needed with the resolution of electronic monitoring gear, temperature, thermal, and other things that allowed us to look at these behaviors in many different areas. And I put together this little system. I got funding from another private foundation. My colleagues wouldn't fund the work. You know, most people would review the proposals and say, Phil, we've been diving for years. We've never heard anything. You're crazy. You know, the fish aren't making sound. So I got the Island Foundation in Cape Cod, funded a project. I went down to Jamaica, where I've been working for decades, and filmed a group of fish, hamlet fish and parrotfish. You'll see them in a video, and I was blown away. Not only were they producing sounds like hydrodynamics, which we expected, but they had really purposeful biological sounds, like you just sort of heard this on the brrr, and I'll sort of show you that in a minute. So my interest really gets, I get excited about the potential of using these things to remotely monitor where and when fish are spawning. And that's where I started talking with Tony, because I'm struggling as a scientist to learn new technology. When I started, there weren't computers. And my early sound analysis was on these primitive spinning machines. We built our first computers to listen to sound and signal analysis. And of course, you can do on your iPod, you know, with GarageBand and all these things. So the music and industry has a lot to contribute that we're trying to, as scientists, understand how we can use it. Now there's a problem because most of it's geared to human speech and human levels, and we've got to sort of break beyond that. And the key, really, that I'm trying to do, I mean, as a scientist, the research I do is a lot of fun. I go all over the world. I go scuba diving. I try to find fish fornicating and film them with a camera and do audio recording. It's fun, but then we want to take that and develop new technology that applies to fisheries. And more importantly, again, how do you set up marine protected areas? And it's a huge, huge issue. You know, to really do it effectively, you have to know this ecosystem and the organisms. And for many of you don't know, when many fish, not all, but many fish, whether temperate or tropical, when they spawn, they get together in certain spawning arenas. Many of them migrate to particular areas. They go rise up in the water column. They spawn eggs and sperm. They get fertilized. They float to the surface, drift out to sea for weeks to months in the open ocean. And it's a huge mystery what's happening to these things out there. And then they somehow come back. There's a lot of work looking at how larvae return. Sound is one modality. But there isn't just one modality. There's many going on. And although we're talking about sound, in my own work focused on sound, I'm really trying to look at all of the... This is good water. Beer? Easy. But it's really, you know, and coming back to ESP, we are limited as humans. It's amazing how bad our hearing is, how bad our eyesight, and animals have a much broader spectrum. So we really are struggling with technology that sort of opens these worlds to us. All right, let me see if I have the audio, and I'll try to play a little bit to show you some of this. All right, while we're checking in here, put yourselves. Are we on? There we go. All right. So first, this is one of the classic fish. This is a toadfish. That's the male. And that's called a boat whistle sound. And that's the male calling to the female. This was one of the very first fishes recorded. In fact, off the dock at Woods Hole, where I was a student and professor long ago. And this fish is loud. We can hear it. But other fishes, we really can't hear. And if you see coral reef, you know, and I love Cousteau. I mean, obviously did huge amounts to move our field forward. But remember, he called it the silent sea. And that prejudice has really biased how we've looked at the ocean. This is in the Philippines, typical coral reef. And here's so those are all different, sounds of fish interacting. And one of the things we're doing is looking at fish language. Are they using specific sounds with specific behaviors? The key to developing technology that can monitor reproduction is to be able to argue and demonstrate that this specific sound only occurs with this particular species when they do this behavior. And an example, now I'll show you, fornicating. These are small little groupers, hamlet fish in Jamaica, and when they come together, you're going to hear them have an orgasm, which synchronizes gametes. Here's another one. This is interesting. One of the most... I'll come back to that in a second. I'm going to show you this one. This is one of the most endangered fish in the Caribbean. This is the Nassau grouper. And groupers are endangered, as many fishes are, because they're being speared out. And it's a question of predator-prey interaction. I'm not going to get into a long lecture, but what you're going to see here is this grouper as I'm swimming towards it. And it's going to give a warning display. It's going to advertise toward me. Watch its belly. You're going to hear a rumble. And then that's a swim bladder sound. They have different modalities for producing sound. And then it's going to change color. You're going to see the dorsal fin move. And it's going to make a stridulatory sound, which is rubbing hard parts together. Heard that? So the fun part is going underwater and filming these things. The science part, of course, is how do you use this? How do you develop this into technology that we can use for conservation, for science? And there's that application. There's also the pure science of understanding what I'm interested in, fish evolution, how they produce sounds. Do they have language? Is there something more there than we give them credit for? And I can tell you often when I talk to fishermen and show videos like that, you get a little more empathy for the animals. We have, it's the old German saying, "Stumm wie ein Fisch." Did I say that right? Yeah, so, mute like a fish, right? But they're not mute. They really have a voice. What's critical is that I'm trying to use these to help us understand where when they're spawning. Because when we look at these earliest embryos, those are the stages most susceptible to pollution. And that's our best indicator of contaminants. And I won't go in. All right, let me just finish. I'm going to show you a 3-minute video. I had a friend in the film industry years ago. This is about 15, 16, 18 years ago. He says, "Phil, you're such a scientist. Don't be so serious." Which I can't help. But we worked together and he produced this little film. It's on YouTube, by the way.
The ocean is a majestic and splendiferous resource, which is at once alive, as it were, with a bountiful plethora of biotic diversity. For example, let us take a close look at this tide pool.
Now this is a video that may seem corny. It's about coral reef fish when they get horny. They feel it in their veins, they got it in their genes. On a full moon night, they're like sex machines. On the coral reef, in the moonlight, they love to scrum till the night is done. Well, you might be a moaner, you might be quiet. When the reef fish do it, it's a riot. They can't be stopped when the girls meet the boys. When they scrump on the reef, they make lots of noise. On the coral reef, in the moonlight, You know they love to scrump till the night is done.
Now, the coral reef fish of the Caribbean Sea have a mating behavior which fascinates me. On the full moon night, they find a mate, get together, and procreate.
Scrump, scrump, scrump on the coral reef. Scrump, scrump, scrump like the divers. Scrump, scrump, scrump. You know they love to scrump till the night is done. You can see it in the bears with their great big hump. On the full moon night, you know they like to scrump. You can see it with your eyes, you can hear it with your ears. It's the next best thing to coral reefs and cold beers.
Now, the interesting thing when the reef fish spawn are the sounds they make when they get it on. If you listen real close with the proper gear, little fish romance is what you'll hear.
Scrump, scrump, scrump on the coral reef. Scrump, scrump, scrump in the moonlight. Scrump, scrump, scrump. You can hear him scrump until the night is done. So the next time you head to the Caribbean Sea, check out the fish and listen to me. Put your head in the water on a full moon night. When you look at the fish, they'll be doing it right. They're gonna scrump, scrump, scrump on the coral reef. Scrump, scrump, scrump in the moonlight. Scrump, scrump, scrump. You know they love to scrump till the night is done. Scrump till the night is done. Scrump till the night is done.